This fifth session of our November convening of EdPrep faculty, this year around diversifying the educator workforce. This morning we have Dr. Jerry Kraver, Dr. Stacy Bailey, and soon to be Dr. Simon Cropp from UNC in the English Language Arts Department. So thank you very much for joining us, and please take it away.
Hey everybody, I'm going to now try and share screen. Good luck with this, and please be patient. I suck at the screen share, but I think I might have it. I tried to cut out as many things as I could. Oh no, that's my, oh, there's my email if anybody wants to take a part of it. Hang on, I see that. Oh, there it is. Do you see this down here? I'm going to click on this and I'm going to share. Ah, nice. Okay, don't look ahead. No one read ahead. I'm going to share from beginning.
All right.
Okay, I'm feeling positive. I'm feeling working out. So this is our paper, our presentation. It's on creating the culturally responsive teacher, one program's journey towards equity and justice. And as Brittany nicely said, I'm Dr. Jerry Kraver. Stacy.
I'm Dr. Stacy Bailey.
And I'm almost Dr. Simon Cropp.
Simon is ABD, and Simon's doctoral research is on school community partnerships. So please share any information about that you have, and he'll be joining us at our meeting, Brittany. I've drafted him for that. So thank you all for, thank you CDHE and Sam and Brittany, and thank you all for attending. What we want to do today is share with you how we have been working to create programs that prepare teacher candidates for the challenges that await them. And they are many. And I wanted to take a few minutes. I was telling Stacy and Simon, we share a pod where our three offices are in a little hallway. So we are essentially a family unit. We're together all the time. And I plopped down in their office, in Stacy's office, which is the most comfortable. And I said, if I could take, and I said I wanted to talk about this, and I wanted to take a second to reflect on what I've learned in just these few days. And I've come to discover how different are some of our challenges up north from the challenges faced by teacher educators in Denver. The imbalance in the demographics of the teachers and students is pretty much the imbalance in our program at UNC. We have about 75 teacher candidates in our program, and maybe 25% are students of color. And those numbers mean that our program, run by 3 white people who teach in a school of mostly white faculty, is trying to create teachers prepared to work with students who won't see themselves in their teachers. And I guess I've thought about that in my 20+ years at UNC, and I hope we've tried and continue to try as best we can to live up to our mission, which says we are guided by a commitment to social justice and to ensuring the dignity of the individual inside and outside the classroom. But damn, it's hard work, and it's getting harder. So I keep seeing that, and the value of, I think, conferences like this, gatherings like this, is that it just reminds us of the work we have to do. So this is where we want to go today. We want to talk about what it means to be authentically responsive to our culturally different students. And we want to talk about how our teacher preparation program has worked hard to support our students and prepare them to support, work with, and inspire their students. And then we want to talk a little bit about the geography of opportunity. So if that all makes sense, and if there are, and please, while we're doing this, don't hesitate to stop us and ask questions. We were going to use breakout rooms, but because our group is small, I think we'll stay together. So if you've got something you want to say, please throw it in the chat or throw up one of those hand things, and we'll gladly stop and have a conversation. So with that, I'll send it off to my colleague.
All right.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. So Jer, click to the next slide.
That's right. Stacy and Simon, let me know when you need me to click.
Okay, no problem. So, right, these demographics aren't anything surprising to us. It's something we've been talking about all week as we've been attending these presentations. That most of the teachers in the United States are white, middle class, and identify as female. And that recent data from the National Center for Education Statistics indicates that 80% of the teachers in the US public schools are white. And that juxtaposition with the fact that over 50% of our students don't identify as white. this demographic gap between teachers and students, it's really significant, and it impacts all the aspects of the classroom. And it's something in our English education department that we talk about often. Just right here in little old Greeley, right, where where our teacher candidates are doing a majority of their practicum work, there are over 90 different languages spoken in homes in Greeley, and then those students are bringing those languages and those experiences to the classroom, and it can be such a beautiful asset, and it can bring along so much background knowledge that is valuable. But we constantly need to remind ourselves and our teacher candidates that sometimes the background knowledge that our teacher candidates are bringing to the classroom is just different. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different. And what is imperative for us is to recognize the humanity inside of each individual, and then be able to honor that diversity and really understand it as an asset, and not just at the theoretical level, but at the practical level as well. And that's what we want to talk to you about today is how our program is combining a lot of the theory with the practice so that our teacher candidates are working with their students and working for their students instead of working against the grain with their students. So with that, I'll turn it over to Simon, who will talk to us about some of the theoretical underpinnings of our program.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy. And I guess I could actually even start this with a little story, as a white male, about some blind spots that I've had, where I think I've been working with Jerry and Stacy for about 5 years now. And it must have probably even been my first semester working with them that we had just kind of a meeting between our our teacher candidates and some local teachers. And it was about a project the local schools do to kind of focus on students they identify maybe in the middle of the pack who might want to go to college but aren't sure about it. So it's kind of an intervention designed to help those students get college skills if they need them. And a lot of the things that we started hearing, I'll never forget, after this meeting, all of our students gathered around our offices talking about some of the things they heard from local teachers. And what bugged me a little is I didn't necessarily hear it till I started hearing it from our students, but these old myths that are rooted in deficit culture, right? That these kids come from families who don't care about education or things like that, right? Even if the families don't care about education, we're going to help these kids get to college. Those kinds of things, they may even seem they come from a good place, but again, they're rooted in this kind of this deficit approach to education. So we really have kind of gone back in that graph there. You see CRP in the middle. That's culturally responsive pedagogy from Gloria Ladson-Billings. And really, I think, though there's differences between culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching, culturally sustaining pedagogy, they're often used interchangeably. And I think for us, this is kind of, Ladson-Billings has been, that foundational framework that we used, to begin weaving through our program. And I just really love her, kind of three-tiered approach to this of, we have to focus on three things for our culturally diverse students to be successful. And that is student achievement. They must know how to achieve, or they must experience success in the classroom. Cultural competence, meaning they understand a culture separate from their home culture. And critical consciousness, which is, this idea of helping students see, systemic inequities and inequalities built into the system and pushing back and learning to challenge those. So really that's the heart of all this. And I thought I would start there, but Jerry, if we go to the next slide, I can jump into some of the skills we use in our program. I guess we'll go, the first bullet point there. So as I said in that story I told, there's lots of myths that still persist about our students who come from culturally diverse communities. And some of these myths may seem to come from good places. We want all of our students to be successful, obviously, but like I said, all of this seems to come from that deficit model of education, and undoing these beliefs can be difficult, especially in teacher candidates, because a lot of times we don't maybe even consciously realize we're thinking these things, or if we're hearing it from teachers in the field, if our teacher candidates are in the field and are hearing it from others, they're internalizing that without maybe consciously realizing what they're really hearing. So that's been a really hard, like, how do you undo that? So for our teacher candidates, what we try to do by, to weave these culturally responsive skills throughout our program is even if we could undo all those old beliefs, we have to put something positive in place of that. And we think one of the best ways to start doing that is for our students to understand the importance of learning about the community in which they teach. You can't just go and start teaching at a school. You have to know who the people are, who the families are. And like Jerry said, right, I'm interested in school family community partnerships. You have to form a partnership with your families and communities around you if you want to understand the culture of your students. And that's something we really work on early with our teacher candidates. How do we build these partnerships? How do we begin to see? I mean, I can remember when I was a young middle school teacher and hearing things from some veteran teachers, not all, but sometimes you'll hear things like, oh, families can be tough, don't let them push you around. But that's not the heart of forging good, positive relationships with them. So how do we, find ways to bridge these gaps with these communities so we understand who our students are? And I think that's probably, we see that as that really good first step as a skill necessary for our our teacher candidates to becoming culturally responsive teachers. And Jerry, we go to my next bullet point now. Student, and really, so these are just as an overview, these are, again, the skills we're weaving through our program that come from Gloria Ladson-Billings, but also Geneva Gay and other people who work with culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching. And student-centered teaching is a part of this. It's the collaborative, cooperative, and focused on community approach we have with our students. We want students to engage and direct their own learning in meaningful ways. This is a philosophical approach to how we teach. I was having a conversation with a friend who's a teacher recently who said, this student-centered teaching, it's just kind of like, let them pick a project they do, right? And it's so much more than that. It's truly a philosophical approach to how we approach the classroom. And it isn't just, and that's the hard thing to undo. Like, how do we take what practically something could look like that student-teacher or student-centered, as opposed to how we philosophically approach our whole classroom and interacting with our students. And I'll touch on this more in our last bullet point, but especially in English language arts and our content area, I've noticed it's hard for teachers to move away from certain types of content, like reading, certain books, classic books from the canon. It's sometimes hard for them to move away from that and think about what might be more culturally relevant to their students. But what we try to do with student-centered approaches is help our teachers realize it's not about us so much as it is about what our students are learning, how they're engaging with the content, and that focus on them is so important. And that really leads into the next bullet point, which is we want to be facilitators of learning as opposed to I guess the sage on the stage, right? That old quote. It's I actually have a friend, again, who's a teacher who hates that whole quote about be a guide on the side, not a sage on the stage. But I think what gets lost in that translation is that people believe what means we just remove all structure or instruction from our classrooms. And something we focus on with our teacher candidates in our program is culture plays a big role here, because what we can do is if we focus away from that content, for example, we help our teacher candidates understand teaching skills over content is what's necessary, right? So if we teach them reading and writing skills that they can transfer to whatever they read or write, that to us seems more important than reading a text or a piece of literature that's always been taught that may not be as relevant to our students. So to me, this is obviously, I think, related to Paulo Freire's banking concept of education. And our students, all of our students have so much access to information now. So we want our teacher candidates to see it doesn't matter. Like if we stand and act as like this one center of knowledge in the classroom, our students have centers of knowledge they can access everywhere. And that's why it's so important to know who they are, and for us not to treat education that way, but for us to help them learn to navigate all those different, I guess, approaches to learning they'll encounter in their lives. So, and Jerry, we can go to the next slide, because I think one thing I think that can also get lost in this is this idea of high expectations, right? At the heart of all this is high expectations for our students, and our teacher candidates realize they're not removing rigor or high expectations from the learning equation when they focus on their students cultures. They understand that high expectations are the norm, our teacher candidates do, and they're necessary for all of their students' long-term success. And reinforcing high expectations comes from letting our students experience authentic success. If we constantly are communicating to our students, for example, I've talked with our teacher candidates about this, about things sometimes they hear in classrooms, that if we're constantly communicating to our students that, you're below grade level in reading, you're lagging behind peers at other schools, soon that's all our students begin to internalize about education in general. And they lose conviction. They become alienated from the whole process. So we work with our teacher candidates to understand this importance of how do we scaffold for meaningful academic success when sometimes students haven't felt much of that, maybe up to the point of middle or high school. And maybe they have, but if they haven't, it's true we learn so much from failing, and that probably explains why I know so much about some things. But I think also we have to remember that we also learn from succeeding. And so our teacher candidates, we work really hard with them to show them how are these ways you can scaffold meaningful success into your classroom. Because kids can tell the difference too if it's not meaningful, if it's just, oh, you did great, but it has to be meaningful. Sometimes I hate telling these stories, but I think it's helpful too, because I remember when I first started teaching middle school, if I had a student that might respond to me in a way that was outside of the standard variation of English, just internally and I guess spontaneously, I'd respond with, that's the incorrect way to say that. And I quickly learned that I was privileging one form of communication over all the other ways our students learn and speak and communicate at home and in their communities, and it was harmful. And so I learned I had to shift course on that. And I want to help we all want to help our student or our teacher candidates see this as they go through our program. And we can go to the next bullet, Jerry. Thank you. So teaching skills and content within the appropriate cultural context really, I think, feeds into everything we've talked about. So we realize we have to be active. I guess what really I want to say here that's, different is we want our teacher candidates to understand they have to be active learners about who their students are as well, as opposed to, they're the teacher, the students are the students. We can't make this partnership happen with our communities and our students' families if we're not trying to go out and actively learn something new about where we are. This just helps, and honestly, this helps our students not feel alienated by the frankly stark disparity between home and school cultures that they see every day. This should not, and so something I want to say is cultural competence. When we think about Gloria Ladson-Billings and how she defined it as students being competent in a separate culture than their home culture, I think as much as that's true, also our teacher candidates understand they need to be culturally competent in their students' cultures as well. So, and we can go to my last bullet, Jerry, and it's interesting. Ladson-Billings has updated her culturally relevant pedagogy over the years multiple times and said she feels like a lot of times we start with this one, just changing our curriculum to be more culturally responsive without thinking of a lot of the other aspects of this first. So that's why I put this last, because in some ways, this could be the easiest. Oh, I take what I have and shift it to match my students' culture. But if I don't have all that other groundwork laid, I don't know what culturally meaningful curriculum changes might be for my students. So this is very important. But I do think for me, and I don't want to speak for Stacy or Jerry, but for me especially, I feel like this has to kind of come last after we know who our students are. So and really that's all I have on that one. And that's why I save it for last, because I just feel like without those others above it, this one's really hard for us to do effectively. So anyway, so for us, these are ultimately the set of skills we weave through our program as our teacher candidates go through our methods classes, go through their practicum, go through their student teaching.
So building off Simon's last point, designing culturally diverse curriculum, I'd like to open up the floor. Jerry, if you go to our next slide, and talk about program changes and program redesigns and the number of credits that our students should be taking, can handle taking. With the changes that happened, I suppose it's been 2 years now, the Colorado Department of Education requiring a minimum of 6 credits for initial teacher licensure to speak to some culturally and linguistically diverse students. It just provided a great catalyst to make some of these changes. I'm really lucky to work with Jerry and Simon, and we were already working on these changes, and it just gave us more fuel for our fire. But it's not always easy to do program redesign, and we definitely bumped into some struggles at our university. So I'd like to open up the floor and hear from some of you. How did things go a couple years ago when you needed to add 6 credits to your program? How are things going getting some culturally, some culturally and linguistically diverse pedagogy involved in your program? And since we're all since it's a small group, please just go ahead and unmute, share your screen if you don't mind, and share with us how's it going, because it can be rough to do program redesign. It's a lot of work. Don't be shy. Come on. Is there anyone, Liz, Dan, Barbara, Brittany, you can talk to us from the CDHE level. How's it been going trying to get this stuff incorporated into your programs?
I can talk a little bit. At Colorado, I work at Colorado Mountain College and direct the Ed Prep program here. And we do have, we have a dual licensure pathway where our elementary students get the elementary certification and the culturally and linguistically diverse. So we do have, I think we have, I don't know, like 18 credits of CLD coursework embedded in our BA pathway. But when I saw 126 credits, that's exactly what it takes for our students to finish our BA pathway, which is okay. But, compared when you think about the equity and credit works and 120 credits being the minimum for a bachelor's degree, sometimes we worry a little bit because we always want to add more. And we won't, because then it doesn't make the pathway equitable compared to other disciplines. But I will say, as I was listening to you speak, one program change we have been working on is with our mentor teachers who work with our student teachers and embedding culturally and linguistically diverse education into their training. Because your data in your very first slide, Jerry, that you presented on, 80% white female teachers in the classroom, it's even more probably in elementary than it is in secondary. And we just want to make sure that our mentor teachers are embracing the diversity of our student teachers and understanding their identities so they can be better teacher leaders. So that's what we're working on as a program right now, is that leadership aspect with our mentors.
Beth put a comment in the chat that hers is an alternative licensure program, and they had one course and did not believe we could add a second one. We significantly designed an existing course to incorporate more of the English language standards. And that's sort of what you're talking about, Liz, is sort of akin to what we did. We're a secondary program. And so we took our secondary program, cut English content, battle with the English department, and made it possible for our students in 126 credits to graduate with their BA in English Ed and their CLD endorsement. And then for
Yeah,
other,
so let's, oh, sorry, Jer.
but for other students, just for those who did not choose that path, we have a special education minor option. And we had to embed into those other programs 6 credits of courses that would meet that requirement. I will say that most of our teacher candidates choose the CLD path, in part because they think it will be an easier job market, and it has been. Very few take the straight English one anymore. But I think, and this Beth's comment about trying to find room, exactly, it's the battle with we are housed in the content area. And I know a lot of the programs that I've been hearing from during these few days are in schools of education where they're sort of free from the burden of the English department that wants to control what you do. And that's the sort of battle. We're sort of lucky that they think of us as a side, although most of our majors in the English department are secondary ed. But that's it. And so Stacy, you're going to share now how we've embedded this. Look at my transition right there.
Thank you.
Yeah,
so go ahead and click to that next slide, Jerry, if you wouldn't mind, please. So yeah, as Beth was speaking to, right, previous to having an embedded curriculum, our English education teacher candidates for initial licensure had a separate endorsement in CLD. And it is something we highly encouraged, and we spoke to the job market, and a number of our students did it, but not as many. And one of the problems was that they were seeing that culturally and linguistically diverse content and that endorsement as something very separate from their initial licensure program. And it was problematic. And we were not just seeing that with English education and CLD, we were seeing that with English education and special education minor, not endorsement. And the students were not really crossing that information over and really embracing it. So, Jer, if you go ahead and click, we went ahead and created, oh, perfect, thank you. We went ahead and created separate pathways for our teacher candidates where they could integrate and combine English education and the CLD endorsement, English education and the special education minor. We actually moved aside some English content and wrapped those endorsements in with the major itself. So let's go ahead and look at in our world what that looked like for us. So Jerry, if you go to the next slide.
Something has happened, and notice I've got this very fancy thing going on here, and
there's something red zooming around the screen.
I feel obviously I've clicked on something I don't know what I'm doing with, but we'll just live with it for now.
Entertaining.
I feel very excited with it. Yes, there we go.
There we go. Okay, so yeah, Jerry, if you just sort of listen to me talk and we can click through these.
Yeah, look at me. I'm making a big disaster here. Oh God. Okay, I'll stop
no, you got it.
Moving my hand away.
Welcome to my world, friends. So all right. We wanted our teacher candidates to understand that culturally responsive pedagogy was not something separate from being an English language arts teacher, that it was part of becoming a teacher candidate. So we have 4 methods classes in our program, but we actually start our teacher candidates second semester in with issues in education. It's actually part of our first year composition sequence. And so they're doing research and presentations surrounding what is happening in the world of education right now. And there's a strong emphasis on the culturally linguistically diverse and the culturally responsive pedagogy element to that. In addition, during that semester, they're taking one of their LAC courses required for the endorsement in a multicultural education, so an MAS course or a HISP course. Go ahead and click. So we draw that across into their first phase in our program, their first English education methods course, in which we introduce them, of course, to their content area standards. For us, the Colorado Academic Standards in Reading, Writing, and Communication, but we also introduce them to the WIDA standards the English language learner standards in the state of Colorado. And then simultaneous to that, they're doing their first step in practicum with their minimum 32 hours of observation and their next course in culturally and linguistically diverse, so that we begin talking to them in their methods classes about how all of these elements work together. Year 2 of fall, they step into their second methods course, where we're continuing to talk about the Colorado academic standards. We're continuing to require them to do WIDA differentiations on their lesson plans. And we layer all of this with social emotional learning and talk about, we tend to use the Austin Independent Standards. They're just really well written, and talk to them about how all students can be working together and creating some of these safe places and some of this culture of learning that can benefit all teacher candidates, all students from all areas. In addition, they're taking their next step in their culturally and linguistically diverse endorsement. Go ahead and click here. There it is, good. The next semester, they do what's called step out of our program. So, they'll do in their year 2 spring and their year 3 fall, they've got 32 hours of observation in a middle school, 32 hours of observation in a high school. Then they step out of our program. We continue to work with them in a methods course where we're working with Colorado academic standards, the WIDA differentiation requirements, and then take them into their first methods course where we also overlay social justice standards. During this semester, where we're discussing really honing your skills as an English language arts teacher and working with students from a social justice mindset, they are working with their CLD instructors in their methods courses and doing their CLD practica, which is a minimum of 80 hours in the classroom and 10 hours in the classrooms in their host school's neighborhood. So it's not in the classroom, but it's working with students outside of that. So we can wrap all of those things together, really building from those social justice standards and helping our students understand how this is all one big piece coming together to help them be a teacher who is truly embeds culturally responsive pedagogy in their philosophy, in their lesson planning, in their interactions with students. Our final step then is where the rubber meets the road. It's praxis. We bring all of this together with this ramp up with their English education practicum, with their minimum 90 hours inside of a language arts classroom. We highly encourage at this point that they choose whether they want to move forward with middle school or high school. And while we don't require, we highly encourage and we hand place all of our teacher candidates at this phase with a host teacher that has a high likelihood of staying with them for an entire academic year, so that they can do their English education practicum 3 with their student teaching. They're required to be placed in a school that houses students who are identified as English language learners, and that they can really bring all of this learning to bear that they've been working on with all of these standards, with a mentor teacher who understands that they're bringing all these elements together, with students who come from diverse backgrounds, and hit the road running and really help them begin to develop themselves as a first-year teacher before they even finish our program. Okay. So I'm going to turn it back to Jerry, and we're going to talk about the really interactive element of how we can bring our teacher candidates to this understanding, and some really amazing free tools out there that can help all of us bring our teacher candidates to this understanding.
Thanks, Stacy. Thank you, Stacy. And before we begin, are any of you familiar with either the Opportunity Atlas or the Child Opportunity Index? And if anybody is, you could like wave your hand. If I touch my chat thing, I get all discombobulated. So I'll just leave it at that. So if you aren't familiar with it, then I'm really excited to introduce you to these tools. And as I'll explain when I chat with you, they were introduced to me by a student. So I learn from my students all the time. Oh, wait, there's a chat thing. Nope, there's nothing. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about, a minute, okay, I'm going to multitask now, which could be a disaster. So part and parcel of being a culturally responsive educator is understanding the lives of students outside of the classroom. And there's only so much we can learn from the standardized assessments and from their academic records. And we can get some snippets of who they are from reading their journals or observing their interactions in the classrooms or hallways. But really knowing students involves this complex interplay of multiple factors. And this knowledge allows us to work more effectively with all our diverse students, helping them find ways into the curriculum that are personally meaningful and as a result engaging. And as Simon was talking about, this is the idea of we have to know our students before we can decide what kind of content is going to be meaningful to them. James Banks talks about let's celebrate Black History Month and let's celebrate Women's History Month, and we'll just throw that in there, and somehow or other we're being multicultural. And so we want to think about the holistic approach to this. Now, we can learn certain information from school-based data or from casual observation, but that's insufficient for understanding how ready our students are for learning. And that readiness depends on more than schema or prior achievements or self-efficacy, although each of these matters. Students are shaped by the neighborhoods where they are raised. And those on all sides of the political spectrum recognize that geography, and more specifically zip code, might be destiny. And the communities that shape our schools and our students are complicated spaces, and we need to understand them. And RTCs, and it's interesting, I see that a lot of you have alternative licensure programs. We don't have that. We're a traditional program. UNC does have an alternative licensure program. We don't participate in that. So we're a traditional 4-year program. And our students, as Stacy described, spend 3 semesters prior to student teaching, actually 4 if they're doing the CLD endorsement, in partner schools. And those partner schools are typically within 25 miles of UNC. So they're typically in that general location. If the student teaching can take them other places. And that's especially, a lot of ours come to Denver, and that's really why they are facing a different demographic than they might know up here in Northern Colorado. And so we want them to understand that where they're from is different from where their students might be from, and that even over their 4 practica prior to student teaching, they are dealing with students from completely different neighborhoods. And we want them to begin to understand that. And so 2 tools that help students begin to understand more deeply the factors that affect students are the Opportunity Atlas and the Child Opportunity Index, or the COI. And taken together, they can help TCs bridge that knowledge gap between the places where they come from and the places where they are headed. And I was introduced to this, the Atlas, by a student named Tim Hernandez. And in an email written at 10:32 one evening, he sent this to me. And he's saying that his mind is moving way too fast. He had stumbled on the Opportunity Atlas and everything that we could use it for, about discussing privilege, about the idea of advocacy, about helping teacher candidates learn where they come from. And that was the first email. At 2:17, he wrote to me again saying that he had just discovered that you can adjust the data and change things around. And you can see he's very casual with me. It's insane. And so he brought it to my attention. And by that next week, I had redesigned my methods class. I was teaching methods of teaching literature to include the Opportunity Atlas. And I've used it teaching literature methods, teaching literature, because I am an English PhD, and I use it teaching an ethnography class. So I found it to be a really interesting, a really compelling tool. And that's just one of them. So the Opportunity Atlas uses data from the Census Bureau and Harvard and Brown universities, and they map the impact of where a child grows up at the granular level, the communities where they live, et cetera, et cetera. And the data details such things as unemployment, household income, racial demographics, graduation rate, rent, median home prices, incarceration rates, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the Child Opportunity Index delves further into the conditions of neighborhoods, arguing that there's a significant causal relationship between children's neighborhood environment, their educational attainment, their employment, their income, and their health outcomes. And it examines, like the outlist, what they call the geography of opportunity by considering 29 neighborhood indicators identified as dimensions of neighborhood opportunity. And they talk about the availability of schools, early childhood centers, what kind of peer and adult influence, environmental quality, green space. So they really try and take a look at the neighborhoods where our students are growing up. And here's the full 29 indices. And it's both tools are available for all 72,000 neighborhoods or census tracts. And a census tract is how the census divides up the country. And typically the average is 4,000 people in 1,600 housing units. And so now I am oversimplifying what these tools do and how the data is used across disciplines, across professions. But even at the most cursory level, they reveal to teacher candidates the multidimensional nature of communities. And armed with this knowledge, they're better prepared to meet the needs of students whose experiences may be different from their own. However, and this is really important, like so many tools, the Atlas and the Child Opportunity Index can be used to build or to bludgeon. So clearly for our teacher candidates, understanding both the communities where they come from and the communities where their students come from helps them think about the geography of opportunity. And in the same way that students are more than test scores, communities are more than data. Therefore, we must be vigilant preventing a deficit view of these communities. Data is neutral, what we do with it is not. The classroom, that's why we must address this in the classroom. The classroom is the space where we can monitor how our teacher candidates process the data that they glean from these resources. So they take the data, but we don't want them to start viewing communities as somehow or other having all kinds of issues that somehow or other, there's nothing positive from these communities. And that's why when we introduce them to our students, we are there to facilitate the conversation. So in introducing students to this, I typically, although I am a real fan of the I do, we do, you do model, I do it, I do, you do, we discuss, because I really want them to experience both of these tools the way Tim did, by getting his hands in there and digging around and seeing what he could do. And if we were a larger group, we would break us up into little breakout rooms. But instead, I think I'll just show you a couple of examples of both of them. And then we could sort of talk about how you might see some value in them, if that seems okay with everybody. So I'm going to change my screen with my little zippy thing here. And I'm going to move to, hang on. Oh, I have to go. Oh, wait, if I go here. Opportunity. There we go. I'm going to click on this. Now I've already preloaded this screen, but no, I haven't preloaded this screen. Hang on. There we go. Are we seeing that screen? Good. So I've already preloaded this screen with one of the schools that we partner with, which is Bella Romero Elementary and Middle School, and that is on the south end of Greeley. And so if you click on this tool, you'll see you can enter the information here. All of these guides here, they're how to use it, what to do, all kind of really good tutorials. And you'll see that there's two sets of data. One is children outcomes in adulthood. And what that does is say, at 35 years old, what are the statistics of children who were raised in this area? By the time they're 35, what's their median income? What's the birth rate, the spouse's income? I'm more interested in the neighborhood characteristics because this gives students a sense of what this neighborhood is like. So median household income, job growth, median rent, the poverty rate, the fraction of foreign born, fraction of single parents, a sense of what this community is like. And so this is the idea what we get for Bella Romero. In this capacity, they get to see some of the statistics. It's all, you can see, it's all marked here. It's all by percentages. They get to see the map changes color. So there's all kinds of interesting ways you can manipulate the map. Now, did it change? Do you guys see a different screen? This is because what I've done here is put University Middle School. And this school is 7 miles away, but all of the data begins to change. So the income at Bella Romero, the average income was, the median household income was $46,000. In 7 miles away in West Greeley, the income is $84,000. all of the figures you'll see begin to change as a result of just moving 7 miles away. Our students in their 4 practica can spend some time in Bella Romero, sometime at University Middle School. These are 2 different communities, and we want them to understand that, not as a way of somehow they're being critical of the communities, but to begin to, instead of asking why can't my students, why don't my students, why won't my students, I want them to think, I wonder why, or what is behind these the challenges my students are facing. And some of this data, I believe, can help them do that. Now, the next, the Child Opportunity Index does something very similar. So here is again, Bella Romero. And here, what it looks at are the overall childhood opportunity, education, health and environment, and you can drop down these menus to the various indicators. And if you look at them, they will give you the general. Overall childhood opportunity index here is very low, and child for them is 0 to 17. Education index low, health and environment low, social and economic index low. If we move 7 miles away, the numbers all change. High, 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 high. So these are the experiences of the students and who come to these schools and live in these areas. And our job as teachers is trying to help them make sense of this data and ask them, given this, what choices might you make as a teacher educator? What relationships with the community might you have? How might you understand students who come to school without the same level of skills in South Greeley as they do in West Greeley? Maybe parents can't make it to, instead of saying, why can't your parent come? Maybe understanding that parents, one of the factors is how far away they are working from home. Maybe parents can't get to school. Maybe the fact that your student isn't doing their homework isn't a function of their being lazy, but maybe it's a function of being a caretaker for family. So we just want to change the way they begin to look at their communities. And we use this data as a starting point. So I'm just going to go to the chat a second and see if there's anything that I can bring up.
Oh, so Jerry, in the chat, one of the things Karen was mentioning in particular is, the impact on teacher self-efficacy being, at a school like Bella versus being at a school like University, and how that impacts how teachers are feeling.
Mm-hmm. I think what I really like about it is our students, when they see this, begin to think about themselves. And I'm going to date myself here. When I use this, when I'm teaching a methods class, I use it with Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking Your Knapsack, your knapsack of privilege. And she in that, and I don't know how many of you know it, I am old enough to actually have read it in graduate school in my doctoral program, and it was 1989. So it's a long time ago, but it was I hate to use the word seminal. It was a seminal argument. It was a seminal discussion back then, talking about privilege. And in it, she lists the daily effects of privilege in her life as a white woman. What we do in class is we try to revise those to X number of years later, because I can't do the math, but it's like 40 years later or 30 years later, what are the effects of privilege? But I also ask my students of color to talk about the daily effects of systemic racism on their lives, so that it creates a conversation. And I think having these conversations helps students enter into these communities feeling a little bit more, I don't want to say comfortable with what they know, but they're going in without, I think, some of the handicaps that Simon suggests. They've been asked to confront some of these issues about their identity and their privilege, and for some who do not have privilege. For some of our students, they lived in these communities. And that's why it's important to have these conversations, so that we're not only talking about the challenges these communities face, but the assets these communities bring. And I think that's the thing that neither of these indices can really capture in the way that we can, by either partnering with our communities or talking with students from those communities. And it matters because one of the things we didn't say is that through all the phases of their program, every Tuesday night, the students get together for a seminar. And that's where they get to compare notes because they're all in the same stage of their program, and that we have a cohort program, about their experiences at schools that are very different. That I'm at a school on the south side, I'm at a school at the west side, I'm at a school that's a charter, a high-end charter, I'm at a school that has, that's in turnaround. So I think that really helps us engage those conversations. So I hope I answered that question. Any other questions about, and I know this is I can't urge you enough to be Tim, and I'm going to talk about him again in a few minutes before we end. But other things, Stacy, do you want to walk us through a little, chat about this, if anybody has anything they want to share?
Yeah, so one of the things that we were interested in hearing from other people is, after seeing tools like this, we know how we use it to talk to our teacher candidates, but every time we look at it, and every time our teacher candidates look at it, something new seems to bubble to the surface. Can you imagine using this with your teacher candidates? What kinds of questions you would ask them to think about, to reflect on?
I was just making a connection. This is Karen. Thanks for such a fascinating look at the tool. I mean, it makes me think of the critical consciousness part that Simon was talking about earlier, and that's helping candidates think about systems, right? Sort of locating all of us within systems rather than individual attributions. So I think that's really powerful. I also want to just echo or kind of build on something, Jerry, you said maybe about assets. So then the sort of other pieces, how do you, and I used to try to figure all this out, and it's not easy, but how do you, if you're doing systems work, how do you not reify assumptions that are deficit, and then so what other things do you have to do to think about asset mapping, or the amazing strengths of communities, right? And so what does that look like too? Because I think things can always tip in a direction of confirming assumptions, right, rather than sort of getting to some more critical consciousness. So that's just the tricky, you're at the heart, the intersection, the rubber meeting the road kind of thing right here. And I don't have any answers per se, but I just appreciate the ability that, or some of the ways you're helping candidates think about systems.
And I think one of the answers to that is, this is data. Students are humans, and that means we listen to their voice. And I'm going to jump ahead to a slide, because this goes back to my student, Tim, who is now a teacher. Hang on. Are we seeing this one? Yep. He is now a teacher at North High School. He worked for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, was accepted to an NYU, Columbia, Georgetown, and decided to come back and teach at North instead. And I just got this email from him last week. We are in constant contact. And again, he's the student who introduced me to this. And as he says, he's teaching a Latinx leadership class, and they brought in Bobby Lefebvre, who is the Colorado Poet Laureate, and Juan Fuentes from the neighborhood. And then he took his students who live in this neighborhood around the neighborhood to talk about what they see, to talk about learning about layers of systemic racism, about cultural appropriation, about neighborhoods being taken over, about the pollution that exists there, about being marginalized in a city like Denver. And it was the last slide that Stacy and I were talking about, that the other day in my office. My neighborhood that made me go through everything will never go away. The streets have a permanent hold on me. And so teachers like Tim ask to hear the voices of the students who live in those places. And I think in working with my students, one of the things I always say to them is, look, the students' voices come first. But it also has allowed him to create this activism in students when they begin to learn that their community has less green space than a community 7 miles away, when they have more pollution. That becomes the chance for them to do authentic writing, authentic research. And so that's what I mean about trying to turn data that can seem like a deficit into an asset, in terms of the students talking about their own communities the way he does here, but also using the challenges a neighborhood is facing as a way to create students who become passionate activists for their community. And that fits into our social justice agenda in our program. And that's one of the reasons why we embrace the teaching tolerance, but change names approach to integrating those standards into what we do. And as a literature teacher, then I can choose my texts, canonical and not, right? Some regional texts, some canonical texts, and I can choose those texts to help students do this, to understand it. And it's funny, I use it in a literature class sometimes. I will read a book I do not like, To Kill a Mockingbird, but because it's in every classroom across the country, and go to the map and look at Alabama today and try and see how little things have changed. And so it's not just a tool for teacher educators, it's a tool I use in my I'm teaching a class on ethnography now, and we use it there as well. So that's what I mean. It's one of those things that we can give. It's like, before everybody came on, we were talking about how Stacy, Simon, and I did a podcast frustrated by this list of theories that was put out by teaching by Mind Shift or something, the 45 theories teachers should know. And we kept thinking, no, they can't know those. That's crazy. And it's like this. Here, what we're saying is, this is a tool we think you can use, but you can't just take the tool. You've got to think about how to use it. And that's what teacher preparation is. Teacher preparation is telling students, is saying to students, this is how you use these tools. This is what we bring to you as teacher educators. This ability, we will help you figure out how to navigate these tools. And then we send you off, as we did Tim, to go and implement them. So that's, that's how we sort of envision it. Right, Stacy? Right, Simon?
Yep, absolutely.
I'm just going to take a look at the chat if there's anything else we can answer, or if there's anything else we can. One of the things that we did want to put in there is I do have 2 instruction sheets that I give out to the students.
Oh, that the PDF is in the chat, so you can go ahead and grab that before the session is over, and it walks you through how to do what Jerry just demonstrated for you.
Much more logical, coherent kind of thing. As I said, I usually give a quick thing. And, usually students learn far more than I do because they're so talented, navigating these things. And so the same way Tim taught me, they continue to teach me. So I think that you'll find that your students are actually, well, no, you guys might be, have more facility with this. I just sort of throw it out there and say, go sit in a group of 3 and play with this. And they usually come up with some interesting conversations. And actually, some of them will go to their home neighborhood. And we have a lot of students who are coming from Broomfield and Cherry Creek. And all of a sudden they're looking at the school where they're going to be the next semester. And it shakes them up a little bit. I think it's sort of, oh, wait, not everybody is lived my experience. And I need to be aware of that. So,
which is so valuable. Yeah. And that you're teaching them to be, thoughtfully reflective, not just noticing stuff kind of passively, but being thoughtfully reflective about their role in it. And, you can keep contributing to this, or you can take a different approach. I was thinking about the trauma-informed practice session yesterday, and I can't remember. Sam and I were chatting about it in the chat, and I can't remember the word they used, but it was like kind of diagnosing, or that, kind of cross between diagnosing and re-traumatizing, by then using that info against them instead of using it for yourself and what it means for your own practice. Just really powerful. Thank you so much.
Our aim is to get students, not teacher candidates, their students to become activists. Right? We want them to fight for things. We want them to advocate for themselves. And we need to give them something to advocate for, as opposed to the bullshit topics that we often have students write argument on, death penalty, things, abortion, rating movies, whatever it is. And here they're grounding their activism in their community. And that, to me, is makes them aware of their community in new ways. And so to me, and again, we have to train our teachers to do that. And by training them in social emotional learning, by training them in trauma-informed practices, by training them in culturally responsive pedagogy, it doesn't become a checklist for them. It becomes just the way, it becomes a mindset And Stacy used that word. It becomes they see everything through that lens. And that's why I remember Dr. Bianco yesterday talking about pre-service teachers being taken through their community in the back of a police car. And I'm like, and as I'm listening to that, I'm saying, holy shit, I hope that's not what it sounds like when I'm doing the opportunity atlas. But the intention is different. Rather than showing a bunch of teacher candidates all that's bad, what we want to do is say, how are you going to use what you are learning here to approach the students that you're going to see in your classroom? How can you develop empathy for them, because their world is very different from yours? Not pity. I don't want them to pity them, but I want them to begin to understand them. As I said, not why don't, can't, won't they, but trying to understand what's undergirding the choices students make.
Awesome work. Thank you so much, UNC team. Let's keep talking about this. This is, I wish we had more time. This is a great conversation and a great tool. Let's figure out ways. Let's collaborate to see how we can share this with more peers and talk about it. I love this intersection of, culturally responsive teaching and family, school, and community engagement and trauma-informed practice and social emotional learning. And so thank you for our participants for joining us. Thank you for our session leaders and for your wisdom and input. And let's keep it going. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Brittany.
Thanks,
Have
Brittany.
a good afternoon, everyone.
You need
Bye,
to
everyone.
give us a yell.